Next item. Okay, so I think I heard that you couldn't hear us. Okay, thank you much. Next item is discussion regarding the 2014-15 Neighborhood Commission Work Plan. So, Ernest, you have something for us on this?
Yes. You had a discussion at the June meeting focusing in on some of what would go into the work plan. The reason that I mentioned that is I mentioned earlier about the minutes is I listed there at least 3 items, maybe 4, that you tossed out to potentially be in a work plan. What I did though was create a mock work plan for you to look at and to discuss. Take no action on this evening, but to kind of be your beginning document that you can manipulate around to be your final work plan. There isn't anything in the work plan that I submitted because you've got 4 areas. You've got annual budget, you've got the DOT transportation issues, you've got the code enforcement, and public safety. What I did and this is the template that the city clerk wants us to create the work plan on. So I'll walk you through it very quickly. For instance, your year starts July. You don't have a meeting in July. This is your first meeting of the new year. So, for instance, if you were to adopt this, say at the next meeting, you already welcome your new commissioners because half of your commission is now new or returning, but they have new terms. The work plan, what staff would like you to do is to go ahead and use this, discuss it, and then finalize the discussion at the September meeting so I can begin the process of moving into rules. Since you're limited to 4 areas, although you have half of the commission being new, there are only certain things that you can focus in on during a 10-month period, because it's 12 months, but you really only meet 10 months out of the year. Under public safety, you've already got the overview of the community service offer program. That was something that has been in the works for the city of San Jose for a while. It's now underway. Part of what you're going to be doing is going out to the community, disseminating the information. I don't think it would be unreasonable for you to examine this program after about 10 months and see how it's rolling out. Because then you can issue a report to council about what's the neighborhood perspective and what they've seen. What is your perspective? On communication and outreach, part of what you need to look at, this may be a longer discussion, but you need to put some language in this, is develop a communication, education, and network on neighborhood issues to better create policy recommendations to council. You struggled with this for many years now, but now you really need to put that to play. And I think you've got the genesis of it from both the new members who have their own connections and networks, and also you've got a plan that you had voted in almost 3 years ago that needs to be dusted off. And the other piece is you also need to figure out how do you get your information to the council, not just to the neighborhoods. How do you get it to the council, to the committees? And I think that that's something that needs to have some kind of support from not just yourselves, but also from the administration. And that may be that you go back to NSC and give reports there, which are then transmitted over to council. Don't know. But by putting this as an action item without the specifics, you can keep working on it. The other piece that you've talked about for many years is going out into the various neighborhoods and council districts and holding maybe 1 or 2 meetings during the year. And then, rather than, it used to be a concept called City Hall in Neighborhoods. And they did that many years ago. Since you represent the neighborhoods, it might be a logical extension, and you've talked about this before, as a line of communication of holding a meeting out in the neighborhoods, maybe on a Saturday, although you meet on Wednesdays, so that more people can attend and see what you do. And that could be done either by council district, or it could be done by a come one, come all citywide meeting that you host in D7 or D9 or whatever. What I'm saying is you don't need to put the enormous details in the work plan that you submit. It needs to be placeholders that you are going to fabricate the actual action items as you move forward through the year. On transportation safety in the neighborhood, increase in bicycle and pedestrian accidents. You asked the head of the DOT, Hans Larson, what he thought would be on the landscape for the commission to be involved in. This is something that has been in the news for the last 12 months. It has valid statistics behind it, and it affects everybody throughout the city. So that's another placeholder. On public safety, this is new, and I have discussed this with city administration as well as with San Jose PD. If you're not aware, the police department purchased a drone, and part of what occurred a few weeks ago was that there was some community reaction to the purchase of the drone and the process that resulted in that purchase. San Jose PD is now committed to doing community outreach in order to talk about this. What could be the use of the drone? Is it a viable option for the San Jose PD to look at? That falls under public safety. It is something that is current. I don't think that it will take up an enormous amount of time for you to either put it on a commission agenda, or to hold a special meeting of the commission on a Saturday to invite all sides of the city to come and do public testimony. So that's another thing. How many of you have heard about this issue? Quite a bit. This is your opportunity as a commission to go ahead and do something for the neighborhoods you represent, to get them involved in the discussion that the San Jose PD wants to occur. Code enforcement. You've been involved heavily with medical marijuana. The regulations have now passed. It's going to be a year before all of that smooths itself out. I think you do an ongoing report, and I've talked to the assistant to the city manager that you've seen, Angelique Gaeta, to do a report to you potentially September, October, on what those new what those new regulations are, because there's a lot of mystery and mystique around it. What does that mean? Where are they going to be located? Now that the actual regulations are in play, then the commission needs an update to pass on to the neighborhoods about the effect it's going to have on your neighborhoods.
So this was where I wanted to answer, because code enforcement, another issue that could potentially be in our purview that has come up in a couple of neighboring cities is brown lawns. Brown lawns. We're in a drought. We're probably going to be in a continuing drought. Technically, under code enforcement, somebody can be cited for blighting a neighborhood. There's the difference between a house where their yard is filled with 8-foot-high weeds and a house where they just haven't been watering these lawns.
And that's an interesting comment. Actually, as you well know, I'm partly in Evergreen, and I was looking at your lawns this weekend, and I'm seeing a lot of brown lawns starting to occur.
This is something where it would be appropriate.
And what I'm suggesting here is not the end-all, be-all. This is to start your discussion and to focus it. You can add to this. You can decide you don't want pieces of it. But to jumpstart it, this all falls within your purview. Part of it you've already discussed. Let me finish up real quickly here. Annual budget. The council district meetings that occur in the spring, you're always a part of that. That's going to be part of what you're going to be doing. Developing your neighborhoods commission budget letter to the council. You always do that. That'll be a standing item. But this was a little more iffy. The mayor's budget meeting that occurs in January, and then usually I staff and put together, and the commission's a part of it. Unless you've been on the moon, you realize there's going to be a new mayor sometime in November. And you don't know what that mayor is going to do. Is the mayor going to have a neighborhood, summit like he usually does in January to get budget input from the community? Don't know. I'm planning on, and I've already discussed this, to go like it's going to happen. It may be that the role should consider a more the commission should consider a more active role in this. If the mayor doesn't necessarily want to continue this, maybe the commission should do something. It's a part that you probably will be, it'll be a rolling part until we figure out exactly what's going to happen when the new mayor is elected.
I can see that being one of the questions asked at the mayoral forums.
So, interesting points, and as you can see, this is going to be a very active document. Overview of city services. It seems like you really, the way we scheduled it is the council gets a briefing from the city auditor, and then about 2 weeks later, the commission gets a briefing from the city auditor. I think you should incorporate that as part of your annual plan, because that's where you see the landscape of what emerging issues are throughout the city from the auditor's perspective. There was also something that I may have, I forgot on transportation. Revisit and update street trees policy in regards to drought. In rules today, Councilmember Conson brought up the issue about trees and the mandates that are already in place, and what does that mean to replace trees when you're in the middle of a drought? What's the responsibility to neighborhoods, to homeowners? You don't know. We're in the middle of a 10, 12-year drought, so that means street trees policy needs to be revised. You've been a part of that process. Looking at it from the perspective of what drought impacts are going to be on residents throughout the city may be part of what you want to consider. This is the overview that I put together, and I was just reporting on that. I'm sorry.
For those of you that I don't know quite yet, you should know that I am also a commissioner. So I get to play in the Brown Act and Political Reform Act outside of my work at City Hall. I'm on the Domestic Violence Council at the County of Santa Clara. I've also chaired Santa Clara County's Commission on the Status of Women. So my input here comes from that experience, but also the continual conversation we've had as your liaison about wanting to make sure that you have all the tools necessary to take work to council if that's something that you want to do. I would encourage you, as you are looking at your work plan, to pick one issue that you can independently do work and study on and take to council committee and then to council. That way you're not always just responding on issues or piggybacking with the work of staff. But to say, and maybe I have no bias here whatsoever, one that looks like a package deal from my perspective on here is the street tree policy. To say, we are going to work on the street tree policy, and this is the policy program we're going to run with that. These are the recommendations that we're going to make, and in March we presume that we will have a policy recommendation ready, and we're going to take that to the Transportation and Environment Committee with the help of staff and the council liaison, and then we're going to take it to council. That you get to report independent of staff, but with the input of staff, is very important for you to, one, be able to flex your power as a commission and do that work, but also for the council to see the good work of the Neighborhoods Commission. So you are incredibly intelligent individuals. You have a lot of value to add. So I would encourage you to do that. That is something that has worked very well for me as I have taken work to the Board of Supervisors, and we've made substantial change that way. So that would be my input. My other input, and this is actually also a flag for Ernest, is that in the the revise of Council Policy 0-4, which is the governance of the commissions, the city clerk is recommending the severe limitation of the use of subcommittees. And this commission has always operated heavily with subcommittees because you are so large and you do have a large body of work. That is not always easily accomplished in a large group setting. So I would encourage you to comment on that with your honest opinions as individuals. I don't think you will have time to comment on it as a body and take action. But you should also consider that in the development of your work plan and what you can accomplish if you're not going to be able to utilize the number of subcommittees that you once did.
Yeah, and piggyback on that, this binder contains two things. One is what the clerk talked about today at rules, which is what Ann's referencing, which is what's called the Boards and Commission Structural Improvement Project, Council Policy 04, what Patty ran you through. There was a separate, this is the one that I mistakenly printed, and there was a separate item that came out actually during the summer, which was, let's see if I can find it for you, which had a change to the rules and regulations of the governing commissions. This is different than the boards and commissions reorganization that's going on. But she is correct in saying that this commission has always had committees, 4 of them actually. And since you're limited to 10 meetings per year, that should be part of what I'll do is I'll link the document and send you out a link so you can look at it then. It's not a small document, it's probably about 40 pages long. Even today, rules they were asking for, well, kind of a sense of what's in the document. It's rather long. I think that, to piggyback on that for new commissioners, the commission took a leadership role on the trees policy about 3 years ago. That was in reference to a reaction to the fact that the incident in Willow Glen where a developer came in and chopped down the trees without properly getting some kind of notice out. It ended up in a situation where they called police, they called in other folks, and it developed that, in essence, there really wasn't an advisory body that anybody could go to aside from the full council. So the commission took that on as in a leadership role to go ahead and make comments and give them to the Department of Transportation. So you've already established the precedent that that's part of what you do. Getting back to this template, the intent was not to dictate to you what the plan should be, but rather for you to consider some of the options that you have within the scope of your 12-month, 10-month plan. Part of what the commission did for the last 6 months before the new members came on was really react pretty quickly to a series of things: marijuana reform, the whole caucus process, on and on and on. So for 6 months, the commission was rolling fairly quickly on what council wanted them to do. Now you have an opportunity to go ahead and be a little reflective and see what it is that you want to focus in on things that you absolutely have to do, versus, as what Ann said, some things that you may want to take some leadership on. That's what you have in front of you. It's up to you to go ahead and decide what that looks like.
I'm going to take the lead here, right, by asking at the beginning, you had this item for the minutes to include your also.
Right, I'm sorry.
Neighborhoods, neighborhood, urban villages, homeless crisis, and boarding. I mean, I don't see any of those on this, and they.
I realized when I was putting this through, I was working from some older notes, and that's why I realized I didn't put them in. Because they were just the reflections of what you might want to look at, and I mentioned it because I didn't want you to forget about them, that you discussed it. So you can add them in. Like I said, this is a draft. I'm just giving you some structure.
Okay, and you talked about Saturday meetings, would that be, you talked about Saturday meetings, would that be at the expense of a regular Wednesday meeting then?
No, in the past, for instance, when you first did your first budget meeting, discussion on the letter, you had a Wednesday meeting and you had a special meeting at which you finished up your letter within about, I think, a week and a half. You can have special meetings.
So we can have our 10 regular meetings and then have a special meeting, leaves on an open moment then to go out to the communities to talk
Right,
about.
you have that option.
Okay. So, Gary first?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, you're talking about a template here, maybe I'm misinterpreting, so I see something here that topics or talking points or something like that, but I don't see any kind of structured document or format or something
Yeah,
that I would populate and
Yeah.
produce something.
This is the template that the city clerk gives out.
I guess my semantics for template are different than.
Well, this is the template that they use, that every board and commission uses.
Do we have other work plans from other commissions that we can look at to see if, I'm a newbie here, trying to get some.
Right, and yeah, there are other, actually, this is a template that was given to me of another commission.
Yeah, but I mean the final
That
work
I-
plan that somebody did, some other commission did, is there a work plan from another commission?
Sure, sure.
So, Dave?
Question to Ann's comments and limiting of subcommittees. If we have 4 purviews that the council and the city have allowed us to work in and have responsibility to present something, the difference between subcommittee and maybe ad hoc committee, could 4 separate ad hoc committees work on one of the topics and develop something to bring to the commission for consideration in the public eye without being a subcommittee, or without being a subcommittee?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, ad hoc committees are permitted, whether under the current structure as well as under the proposed structure. Under the proposed language, what the clerk also says is they will not eliminate standing committees per se. They will discourage the use of standing committees. If you want a standing committee, you will have to write out the reasons that you need that standing committee that will be sent forward to rules, and rules will then take a look at that and make a decision.
And the difference between a standing committee, a subcommittee, and an ad hoc
Standing
committee?
committee is exactly what it means. It's a committee that's permanently with the commission.
I understand.
An ad hoc committee is regulated by no longer than 6 months tops, and then it vanishes on a particular topic.
Which is where the city attorney would probably say you cannot have an ad hoc committee for transportation because that is part of your normal purview, something that you should be engaging with on a normal basis. And you would need a standing committee or action of the full body and an organizational format of the full body to deal with that. I don't mean to sound limiting with this. I would encourage you to go to rules and tell them that you need standing committees. I would encourage you to do that. If you think that that is the best way for you to function and operate, then the council needs to know that, and they need to know that you as volunteers of the city of San Jose need to be empowered to function in that manner. And they should make that decision and be held accountable for it.
But we can have a ad hoc committee of 9 or less commissioners meet for a couple of months to talk about city drone policy. Or we could have another 9 of us talk about the bicycle plan for this year, which would not be a standing committee, it would be responding to a specific plan.
Correct. And the other difference with ad hoc committees as opposed to standing committees, ad hoc committees are not governed by the Brown Act.
Right.
So there is great flex. I've used ad hoc committees in all of my commission capacities because it allows for the flexibility to be nimble and swift with planning and execution. And that is important. But be careful how you use them because you easily cross the line for their intended purpose.
I understand. We have to understand that line and be well behind it.
Right, and just for your own information, I post your ad hoc committees anyway, which surprised Patty, but I'd rather post them than not. So regardless of whether it's ad hoc or not, I'm going to post them.
Right. Okay, on.
So in terms of the question about this being a template, to me it looks like a good template. And the reason is, as we discussed at the last meeting in June, I think the gist of it is we want to be general, we don't want to get too detailed. I don't think we're going to come back in September and have a 4-page document that says we're going to do A, B, C, and this is C1, C2, 3. I think I would even be more generic than what I see here in September when we come back. For example, for public safety, overview of SJPD use of drone technology, sounds great. We're going to go back, we're going to get feedback from residents, we're going to give this some thought, and we might decide that it's a public safety topic, possibly overview of SJPD. Let's not lock ourselves in, I think, as we post this information to the public, to discuss a topic like drone technology, then in a few months we decide, oh my God, there's something much more pressing than this. So I would just recommend we stick to this general outline. I would recommend we be more generic. I appreciate all the thought that went into these great possible topics. And so I guess I'll end with a question. So is the goal to discuss these, throw out some more ideas, and come back in September to maybe vote on what it is we're actually going to include?
I see this as giving direction for how we set the agenda for the following meetings. This is kind of giving the topics that we'll be looking at. It's not going to say on February we're going to handle the crisis that occurred on January 15th. We don't know what's happening with things, but we have some direction. We know some things that will happen at a certain time. So the thing about coming back 10 months after the community service things, that is something we can put on the calendar at a certain time. We know that when the budget is. So you can put some things in here to kind of pin things on here, but things will be coming up. These are kind of giving a direction for how we work on the agenda. So, I'm new to the chair here. I'm going to try to figure out how to do the agendas. I'm going to be working with Ernest, using this as guidance, but I was also going to try to mail out to I was trying to figure out how to mail out without filing the Brown Act, get an input from everybody. So,
Well, what you do is, like I've advised you before, send this out, but comments will go back to me, and I'll gather all the comments. Because otherwise, if you send them out to any of the commissioners, and although you may put a big do not reply, there's always the inadvertent hit the all button, which occurs way too often. Send it to me, as we've done in the past, and I gather them all, and then, I pass them on as a communication that comes from staff, not from each of you to discuss.
So I would request, I will probably, the vision I have would be for me to ask you to send out to everybody about 2 weeks in advance to request any suggestions of topics that you want to have on the agenda. You send in. We would have a meeting a week beforehand. Is that when it is, when the executive committee meets to work on the actual agenda or anything, or is it a week and a half, 2 weeks?
I think it's up to you to decide how you want to run that. Here's how it normally goes. I need to post this 7 days in advance. So this needs to be posted 7 days in advance of the next meeting, which will be September 10th. So all this is occurring 2 weeks before. So ideally, I'd like to meet with you and the vice chair to consider the requests, probably 5 days before that, because you may have some give and take.
And then that itself has to be agendized 7 days in advance, right? It's a public meeting.
I'll check with the attorney's office. It's not a committee meeting. It's a meeting of the chair and the vice chair to discuss the agenda, but it's not, you're not, it used to be you had a work plan committee, an executive team committee.
Right.
I haven't heard you wanting yet to go ahead and put that back together yet.
Okay. David and then Keith.
To the other point, you can talk to all of us, but think of Ernest as a server that you have to serve, you send your communications through, and it gets real easy.
Okay.
Because you don't get in trouble, we all hear it.
Yeah,
Okay.
Ernest mentioned about a work plan committee, to me, seems like the way we have to go. I don't know how we're gonna fill this out unless there's a small group of people kind of charged with the job of selecting things, sorting things out, communicating with others, et cetera, and ironing this down. I also didn't see any way we can get it done by September, I must say. I disagree a little bit with Juan. I do think some specificity in here and some sort of measurements of what we're accomplishing are gonna be really necessary.
As staff, I want to say this. You started in July, although you didn't have a meeting. I think that what happens, and I've seen this happen before, and I'll give this to you as staff advice. You can set up a committee and look at what you want to put in this and how to flesh it out. But I think part of what you need to do is also be cognizant of, you don't want to go into rules so late with what you're doing, because then that's going to say, why you're taking so long to give us a work plan. And I understand the desire to go ahead and, this is kind of an awkward situation, because you have half of the commission that's brand new, coming in, wanting to own part of this, and why shouldn't you? Versus the fact that there are areas that you are going to have to do something for council because they've charged you with that. I would say that if you're going to do that, you don't take too long to do that. And let's postulate that you're correct. You won't be able to come back in September with this. The remarkable thing is this, that when the commission needed to bring together the caucus process, they actually created a document within 2 months that went to council within the time period that needed to happen. My advice to you is probably don't wait any longer than to vote on it in October, to send it to council in October with approved rules. And that would be, I think, the limitation of how much time you want to spend on this. I'm saying that as staff because I also have to remember the calendar of how long it takes to get into where you want to go. And to get to rules, I need to give them the document, quite a bit in advance. So I'm throwing this out not because there's certain triggers as to when the draft has to go to, and you're already in that process right now, where there are deadlines emerging.
And this has to be approved by the rules committee.
And any and all work plans for commissions go to rules for approval.
So they can be kind of general and things can come up and get added on to it and be revised.
Yes, it actually was a comment that was made today by council member, again, Constant, where he said, these work plans, because they approved several work plans, and part of the discussion under the clerk's revised document was, is there flexibility in this to allow for something that may come up? And the answer is yes. The reason I included drone in here, and I didn't think you were going to take a 12-month process on this, was just simply because if you're going to be working on it, you might as well put it in there, as opposed to this is ongoing. That's the only coincidence.
But if you did this thing a month ago, you would never have thought.
I wouldn't have put it in there.
And you don't have the flood of February 15th on here yet. It's going to be flooding on February 15th, and you're going to have to deal with that. There are things that have come up we don't know about.
Exactly. This issue only emerged 2 weeks ago.
And also, how do we get our output out? I mean, it's nice to sit around and discuss all these great things, but how do we report out? That's another part to work on.
In the memo that I have given you a copy of under the selection for the new commissioners, if you look at on future actions at the back of your memo, way at the bottom, it says that the reporting, for instance, on all the new commissioners, how you're doing, how it's all working out, whatever, is going to be discussed in your work plan report that goes to rules. So at the end of 10, 12 months, you're going to create a report that NETU has done in the past 2 times that lists all the meetings you went to, all the actions that you took, how successful you were with the caucus process. So that's a requirement that every commission has to have, is a report out on what they did.
Okay, but in addition to that, I don't want to, when we have our discussion on the drones and we come up with our consensus, I don't want that to wait until the annual report at the end of the year to come out.
Yeah, no,
So we can
no.
write position papers or letters to the council or informal memos, and who does that?
At any given time, the process allows you to go ahead and send something through the council. It can either be agendized, or in the case of your budget letter, I did ask the clerk's office and the attorney's office, they were sent directly to the mayor and council. They weren't part of the council agenda, but they were delivered. So you have an option of either sending it directly to the mayor and council. My advice to you is, if you want to send a recommendation, agendize it. And actually, I think that's what you had mentioned, was Ann had mentioned in talking to her boss, Councilwoman Rocha, that one of the avenues is get onto an agenda with something. And she talked about specifically the issue of the trees. You know, get on to the transportation committee. This will be something that goes through them to council. So that's a different than sending an independent letter.
So I could see having on each agenda a action item saying approve report to council, and then if we don't have anything to report, we don't do it. I mean, just like there's nothing on the consent calendar, but there is an item on the calendar, so if there is something you can act on, we can have a standing item on the agenda saying we can have a report out so that we can take action to do that.
Yeah, and other commissions do that. For instance, the Human Services Commission that I also staff, in the past, the Human Rights Commission has sent, letters directly, agendized them to the mayor and council, and said we want the council to be in favor of whatever. So you can take that route.
Okay, and
In terms of the efficiency right now for the group in sorting out the work plan, you can, to Commissioner Colstead's point, go ahead and have an ad hoc committee that looks at the work plan. You can also refer it just to the executive committee, and people that want to get engaged go to exec, and you can work on it at exec to limit you bouncing around city hall meetings. The other point that I just remembered is that drones are going to be talked about at the September Public Safety Finance and Strategic Support Committee. So what I will commit to doing as your liaison is working with Ernest as your work plan is developed, and making sure that I flag issues that are coming through committee that you may not be seeing. It's my job to see them, so I should pass them along to you.
Okay. So Gary,
Yeah, one thing on Ernest's point about the caucus procedure, that had a timetable at the beginning and end, and it was a specific task that people responded to and developed something. Okay, so that was handled a certain way. I guess what I'm used to fumbling around with is I'm coming here next month, and I got this, and what do you expect me to produce next month in response to this?
from this is a thought process.
Right.
Let us comment or what will be on next month's
Right,
agenda.
but when am I gonna go, solicit neighborhoods and put this out there and ask for responses, or what?
This is more guidelines for our structure here. This is not something that you send out to the neighborhoods.
Okay, so, again, I don't know, what do you expect from me next month in regards to this? What would be, general, what would you want me to do on this?
Can I make a quick comment about that? It's a qualification. You were selected as a commissioner to represent your council district and neighborhoods. So, although it would be ideal for you to go back and ask people what they think, part of the reason you're elected like selected like an elected representative is the fact that you've got experience, that you bring judgment to this yourself, having a lot of experience on behalf of your neighbors. So I don't think there's an expectation you're going to go back and canvass people about whether or not this would be a great idea. think about it from the perspective of what you've learned in your career up to this. And you're the representative that you were selected to represent all these people in a certain way of why they thought you were a good candidate for this. So usually these things go around the table as you are the representatives that give input into this group about what you feel is a priority for the city. Not for your neighborhood, but for the city. Not for your neighborhood groups, but for the city.
So what I want you to look at is, are there other topics that you think that we should be discussing that you want to add on here? And is there something that you know would be coming up in March, for example, that you want us to talk about? Then you could add that to us, but otherwise this is just maybe start thinking about it. So I see the first, Jay.
Would it be appropriate at this time to maybe poll commissioners as to who might have an interest in working with you and the vice chair and kind of teeing up a first sort for Ernest to kind of share with the commissioners and work the feedback to get to the point where there is something for September, i.e. an ad hoc?
So you're asking for that too, weren't you, Matt Hoffman?
Well, my question's a little bit different.
Well, wait, first, Juan had it, so you're asking for an ad hoc committee, let me take it under consideration, Juan, you're next.
Whether or not we use an ad hoc committee doesn't matter too much to me, because my expectation is that I will come back next month to vote on a proposed work plan, the elements of that work plan. I might agree with one, I might disagree with another one. We all have different approaches. My approach will be to reach out to the community in the meantime and say, and drones are just an example. I could have picked any one. Drones seem important, or are we just reacting? What is really important to the community in terms of public safety? What do you want to see here? And I might come back and say, everybody wants to know about the drones. Everybody wants us to help develop policy on drones. Or I might come back with a different opinion. That will be my approach. And so I would expect, well, I know that next month we'll be voting on a work plan, or whether to proceed with a work plan, and how we get there, again, doesn't matter too much to me, as long as we understand that I will be providing input at the next meeting, and that I think, and you can confirm that we will vote on the work plan.
Okay.
And something else that I would toss out as a potential item for a work plan, and we can consider others like this as well. We went from a experimental 30-person commission to a 20-person commission. We reworked our caucus process for last year. I could see on this year's work plan a ad hoc or temporary subcommittee to rework our communications and outreach, to take the reality of the number of commissioners and how we want to effectively get issues to our neighborhoods and bring issues back from our neighborhoods. Because we did a document several years ago, but it's time to revisit that, I think. And that's an example of other things that may be internal to the commission that we may want to consider as well, adding to our work plan, since we're in startup mode.
Okay, yeah, Moses?
Oh, okay, different idea, different thought.
Microphone, please.
Okay. We had an executive committee before where they would meet more than once a month. Is this
No,
right?
they met once a month.
They
In
met
addition to us.
in addition to our regular.
Yes.
Okay, so it was twice a month they met. Now, from what I feel, this committee should be able to look into a work plan and bring it back to us. So they can go through this, as Ann said, take a few of these areas to look at, because there's just too much for us to try to tackle. And this way we could be ahead, because we'll be able to use their time to help to work out a work plan. And we can bring it to here and vote on it. I mean, to me, I think that's doing a little bit more.
So I think rather than having a subcommittee or an ad hoc committee, I would like you all to come up and think of what else you would want to add to this thing and mail it to Ernest, who will then collect all of the ideas. And you'll just have a collection of ideas, and then we will, at the next meeting, spend some time figuring out which ones are important to us, and we'll start sorting through it. I don't think we need an ad hoc committee. I want to get everybody's idea on this thing, and by going through him, it will not be violating the Brown Act. Yes, Dave.
An ad hoc committee could do exactly that through Ernest, with a few of us doing it, rather than all of us through Ernest, or you carrying the load completely.
I wasn't going to carry the load. I was going to have him
Right,
collect
but
all
then
of
he's
it.
got a bucket of stuff that needs to be processed, and what the
And
ad
we'll
hoc
put them in
committee,
alphabetical order. We'll put them on the screen and say what's important.
well, that's a process that we have to understand when we come to the meeting, not walk in and figure out what it is.
So I agree with the chair with the understanding that, hey, if 2 or 3 people want to work on this together as an ad hoc committee, I wouldn't be opposed to it. But what I would expect on my end is we get a deadline by which we submit the proposed ideas. We know we're going to get the information at least a week ahead of time. We're going to have a week to think about all of these. And so we'll have plenty of time, I think, to come in and make a decision next month.
Any other questions and topics on this? So I think we need to close this. I was going to say, get comments to Ernest in 2 weeks, and if you want to have an ad hoc committee, who would like to be on to meet with them on that? Please. Okay, let me.
And there's one over here, so it's 3.
Okay. Okay, the 4 of you choose a time when you want to meet. I'm going to be out of town, so
Okay,
that's one reason.
then we'll work through Ernest.
And then you just everybody can give comment to Ernest.
Right.
You also can discuss amongst you some extra things to give to Ernest, and if the public wants to feed into that.
I'm slowing everybody down here. All in agreement that you need to have an ad hoc committee, but for process purposes and for public consumption, someone make a motion to do that.
Motion to have an ad hoc.
Second.
Discussion? All in
And
favor of
then-
having an ad hoc committee?
And then you need the volunteers.
Okay, first you have to vote to accept the ad hoc
Right,
committee. So, is
right.
all in favor of having an ad hoc committee?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, opposed? Okay, we have an ad hoc committee. Okay. Dave, would you chair an ad hoc committee?
Sure,
Okay. Dave, at your convenience, would you select a time for you to meet with the other
I will do that.
5 people that wanted to get on that? This was, will you take notes? It was Matt, Gary, Nick, and you. Okay? Did you note that?
I'm writing down, how many members here?
Matt,
I'm
Five.
sorry,
Gary,
Pete.
huh?
Nick, Gary,
You want to be off of it?
David,
Okay.
Matt.
So Matt is off of it.
Right,
Pete,
Gary, Matt,
Nick?
Nick and
Matt's
David.
not on it.
No. Gary, Pete, Nick, and Dave is chair.
They will, it's 4-member committee.
Yes. Oh, he has to be off it now. Okay, so the 4 of you will meet and collect amongst yourselves and give information to them, and the rest of you are free to also send information to them, and I will meet with you before the next meeting to
We'll communicate.
try to sort this out.
This
They can send me,
was,
I'll get you a room.
this was the other question I wanted to ask, is in the
Send me
past,
a-
Starbucks will work.
in the past, we had an executive committee that
That's a
was
public
formed.
meeting.
It was the chair, vice chair, and the heads of the other standing committees. Under current rules, what would our executive committee typically be? Would it just be chair and vice chair?
Oh, you said we don't have an executive committee at this time, we do not have standing committees, yes?
Sorry, say that again, please.
We do not have an
I
executive.
wanted a clarification on the executive committee.
Yes.
In the past, we had one, it was,
You had an executive committee, you have a Workplan committee, a Caucus committee, a budget committee.
and the executive committee was composed of the heads of the other committees.
Correct. And
So now that we're not having,
Communications committee.
now that we're not having standing committees, but with the
you may or may not.
we've not formed them yet.
Okay, because typically the executive committee was in charge of deciding what is on the agenda.
Correct.
To fit the next meeting.
Correct. You're a permanent committee now. You have not designated a structure. You can do that. The pilot had a structure, but things are different. You got 4-year terms instead of 2-year terms. You've got a series of other things that have changed.
20 instead of 30.
Right. So, I think probably infrastructure should be one of the items that should be on your agenda. You know, you want to have a committee, and then if you do, then make a request to, let me figure some of this out, because I'm not sure what's in place and what isn't. But, yeah, I think for the purpose of what you're having right now, you establish an ad hoc committee, which is perfectly permissible under either a current or a future, so you're fine. Okay?
I honestly thought we'd be out of here at 8.
There's a final item, just,
I know. Oh, wait, did you have a question on this, on the
Comment.
work plan?
Yes. Ed Rast. I agree with Ann's comments about taking a look and going back to rules, excuse me, about having standing committees. You are not going to be effective. You're not going to be able to get a lot of work done unless you do it. It's just that fact. If you don't do it, you're going to go back into the same situation where a lot of the community didn't think it was worthwhile for you to be here. You need to pick some small topics and get some work done. Basically, 3 areas that you're looking at is budget, public safety, and transportation. You've got code enforcement, but it's a relatively small area. My suggestion is the biggest area is budget. Get your budget committee going, decide what the topics are going to be. One of the things I would suggest is you take a look at what are essential city services and why aren't they funded at adequate levels. And then take a look at the second area in budget you take a look at is non-government spending. Very large area. Very few people know where it's going. If you take a look and pick topics that are important to the community, you get support. Otherwise, you're not going to have support. You're going to fall back into the other area where before, where people are asking why you didn't exist.
Okay.
And Matt's comment about communications is great too. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. And Ernest, you have the next item on the agenda.
Briefly, just so you're aware, the memo, the appointment of the commissioners was in the consent calendar, and that was one of the decisions that needed to be made. Was it ever going to be a separate item before council, because this is a unique commission, or is it going to go to consent? The rule now is it goes to consent. So even though I wrote a very long, paper memo, it looks like it's going to go the same route that normally, whether it's rules or whatever, it goes to consent. May go to consent.